Please welcome Dorinda Makanaonalani Nicholson. Please, thank you.
Thank you, David. In Hawaiian, your name would be Kavika, so you might just call him Kavika.
How do you say that?
Kavika.
Kavika.
Kavika. Colonel Kavika.
We're calling it among other things.
Among other things, among other things. Well, Jim, I am fascinated with the library. The moment I walked in here, I felt at home, started going through the books and looked at all the books I wanted to borrow, I promised to bring back, and picked up one. I must have already put it in my purse.
Already lost it.
You can't have another book.
Oh, here it is. I picked up this one and I opened it and it was dedicated to Ron. So I thought, oh, this had belonged to him, and I may be the last speaker that he has invited. I don't know if you have another speaker coming in the next few months, but I did enjoy meeting him, and I'm sure many of you were down at the Kansas City Library to see the Doolittle pilots. Did you get your picture taken? Yes, yes. That wasn't that an exciting day, and that was when I got to meet Ron, and he extended the invitation to come here today. And then in looking at this book, I found my story in it. So that was extra fun too. This is a book, Men, Women, and Children Who Were Touched by War. So that was fun to find that. And then I am so at home here. The wonderful job you have done in telling the different parts of the history, and I actually am on the National American Red Cross Disaster Volunteers as a mental health specialist and our VA psychologist. I want to speak with you afterwards.
That's right after you talk to John over there.
And then if I can book an appointment with you, too. But the Red Cross has a wonderful program going right now with veterans. And they have a mental health specialists who are trained to do these yellow ribbon events for the veterans before they deploy and after they come back home. And then right now, there are a group of 6 of us that are writing workshops to work with their children, and that will be out next year. So if you would like to help with the military part of Red Cross, I'd love to speak to you. Well, after looking here, I thought, I don't want to hear my story. I want to talk about your stories, and I want to talk about other airplanes. So before you hear, and I certainly want you to hear what it was like to be a child in the middle of a bombing, I am one of the handful of those lucky American children who only had 2 hours of bombing. I did a book for National Geographic where I interviewed kids like me, kids like Ron, all over the world. And if you would have been a kid in Germany, you would have been bombed twice a day. You would have had the Americans at noon, and the British would have gotten you at night. And if you were a kid, most likely, if you weren't away in the Hitler Youth, you would have been in an ammunitions factory, and you were the target. So as American kids, and American adults, we have been so lucky, because other than, I love this poster that says, remember December 7th and remember September the 11th. the two attacks on America, both of them lasting a couple of hours. And this allowed us, the Rosie the Riveter that's here behind me, to go into the factories and supply our men with the best tanks and airplanes and equipment possible, because we weren't being bombed twice a day. Maybe you could have me come back next year. The two other stories that we won't really have time for. How many of you have been to the Pacific Aviation Museum in Pearl Harbor? Awesome. Okay. And then you're going to hold a future meeting of yours, Heart of America chapter will be meeting at the Pacific Aviation Museum after you get that treasury going. And a lot of people miss that. They certainly don't miss the Arizona. 1 million go every year, but very few get over to the Aviation Museum. And I'd like to tell you just briefly the significance of it being who you are. A young couple from Florida came to Hawaii about 7 or 8 years ago now to establish the museum, and one of the first airplanes they got was, which president's Stearman? You guys?
Bush.
Oh, Stearman.
George Bush's Stearman.
Okay, right. Say it again.
George Bush's Stearman, the one he trained in.
You didn't know this was going to be a
Nobody
test,
told me to
did
do
you? But that was George Bush's Stearman that he did his training on, and that was their first acquisition. So while they were there, they said, you know what we really, really want, but I don't think we can get it, but what we're going to try is on December the 7th, when the Japanese Zeros, most of them Zeros, most of the planes were coming back to the waiting aircraft carriers, there was one airplane leaking fuel from its gas tank and trying to get back to the Iro. Unable to make it, so he crash lands on a private Hawaiian island. There is still a private Hawaiian island still today. Can't visit it. Crash lands there. And so Sid Jones, in fact, the book is just out. It's called Before and After the Zero. SYD Jones. It's on Amazon. It's about $15. If you're interested in this Zero crash lands, and Niihau has no telephones, has no idea of what's happened at Pearl Harbor. So it's that story. Anyway, the couple wants what is left of that Zero, and it is at the Pacific Aviation Museum. And I've been writing on it, not been able to sell that book, but fascinating story, because it's the first week of World War II, the first time an enemy holds prisoners, about 200 Hawaiians. It's a story you don't get to hear. And does a Japanese American help him? Oh, you'll have to go to the Pacific Aviation Museum to find out that story. And if I get it sold, and even if I don't get it sold, maybe I could come back sometime next year. The other book that is coming out next year is called The School the Aztec Eagles Built. Anybody know the Aztec Eagles? The Aztec Eagles, in 1943-44, President Roosevelt asks President Camacho, Avila Camacho in Mexico, please help us. please help us. And President Camacho says, we're a small country. I can't help you. Don't really have an army. But you know what? I have pilots. I have pilots that I can send you. So, the Aztec Eagles are the Mexican pilots who come from Mexico by train. They end up in Idaho. WASPs train them to help them with their English, but with their flying. They end up back down in Texas at Sweetwater because of the cold. They had come up in Idaho too late in the year. They train on P-51s and finish up their training in Texas. Fascinating story, 30 of them. Okay, you all know that each pilot needs a crew to help them. So it ends up with 300 of them, Mexicans, going to the Philippines, joining our we're not Air Force yet, are we? What are we called?
Army Air Force.
Thank you. Army Air Force in the Philippines. Their airplane is amazing. Have you seen that airplane, how that P-51 is painted? It has the American with a star on it, but it also has the red, green, and white of Mexico on it. So if you want to see it, if you just Google Aztec Eagles, you will see the airplane. And there is a print available of it, and it shows it over Luzon in the Philippines with those markings. And they also painted white noses on them. And so some of those pilots were known as the white nose. So I'll come back next year and tell you more of that, because very few people know that Mexico had anything to do with us. And in fact, when Ken Burns did his World War II series, he left out the Hispanics. And so they went to him and they said, hey, you know, we were involved and we helped too. So he had to go back and add to that series. So that shows the lack of understanding and knowing what part they contributed to our history. The print that shows it's Air Northwest, if you Google that, you'll also see the print, and there is a print available that's signed by the 10 living pilots at that time. My understanding, there's just one pilot alive today. But still on September the 16th, and that is when the pilots and the Squadron 201 came back to Mexico. Still on September 16th in the village of Tepoztlan, they have a celebration, and then there's a school that the pilots built. Pearl Harbor. I have been able to write my story, not understanding that I really carried such a story. We have to get some distance from that. And it isn't that every December 7th I'm not back there, because it had such an impact on my life. But it took 50 years in 1991 to first write that. And I was married, living here in the Kansas City area, so I wrote an article for the Kansas City Star, and they printed it. And didn't think a whole lot about it, but I saw that there were so many commemorative programs going on at Pearl Harbor that I contacted one of the phone numbers that I saw. And the person who answered, I asked them if they were going to be inviting any women to speak at all of their activities that were happening during that week long of December 7th. And she said, well, no. And I said, do you have anyone who is a civilian? We so ignore the civilian story in terms of literature and repeating the stories and even movies. And she said, no, there weren't any civilians, because as far as we know, no civilians were harmed. And I said, well, I also do see who you've invited to speak, and none of them are a native of the islands. And she said, who is this? Well, I didn't want to tell her I was a Raytown housewife, but I said, I am a child of Hawaii. I lived in the middle of that bombing. You need to hear my story, and that's how it started. So I have told the story, and the response was so emotional that I decided that I needed to write it down. And then which age group would I write it for? And I decided that I wanted this to go to our schools. So 5th grade, certainly on up to adults, but want this history to go to our children and get into those classrooms. So that is the area and the group that I'm marketing or writing for. And an adult sent me a most wonderful email thanking me for writing a book through the eyes of a child, and I thanked him. And then he wrote me back and he says, I live in the Czech Republic. I'm a TV producer, and I've been collecting stories and artifacts of Pearl Harbor in the little village that I live in, and I want to dedicate that museum. Would you come to my dedication? And I said, if you send 2 tickets, I'll come to any dedication. So, how wonderful. This was summer before last. Larry and I went to the Czech Republic. We went to this village of Ložka in almost in the center part of what used to be Czechoslovakia. The people came, brought gifts, and said wonderful, I don't know what they were saying, but said wonderful things. And it was almost as if we were a returning villager. And so it was a wonderful experience. We were there 10 days, and people hosted us. And so finally, finding someone, and I did send a translator with us, and I said, would you please tell me why I'm here? This is what they said. 1939, Hitler invades our small country. They burn our villages, they burn our farms, they move in, they take over the schools. We're not even to speak our language anymore. We felt absolutely hopeless. And we thought, we are absolutely not going to survive. The war goes on, and the war goes on. December 7th, 1941, Japan brings their airplanes. December the 8th, President Roosevelt announces and asks Congress, that's my phone, I'm so sorry, would you please all turn your cell phones off? Because it's actually mine. And because I can see all of you going, it's mine, I'm sorry. So on December 8th, he asked Congress to go to war. Then that means we are also at war in Europe. And this is what these people in the Czech Republic said to me, because I wrote a book. When America agreed to go to war, we had hope. You are the face of hope to us. How powerful the written word is. In my book, Pearl Harbor Warriors, which I will tell you more about, but I interview a Japanese aviator who flew over my house and bombed Pearl Harbor. And years later, I've gotten to travel through the Pacific giving these stories. I've been able to stand on a ship and look at Iwo Jima because of these stories. And so I said, Mr. Abe, I'm coming to Tokyo. I'd love to take you to lunch. He said, you come stay with me. So Larry and I, we got picked up at the train station, and it's nighttime. And he takes us upstairs to his bedroom, and he says, you will sleep in our bed. You will take our bedroom. My wife and I, and at this time, he's probably 85, 86. We will sleep on the dining room floor. We're used to it. We sleep on futons. You'll have our room. That night, Larry and I are in bed, and there's a knock at the door, and he sticks his head in, and he comes over and he bows. And then he walks over to his dresser, and he bows again and says his evening prayers, much like he did about 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the Akagi, before he went up the ladders on deck to the airplanes that were already ready to go. And then he turns to Larry and me and he bows his head again and walks out and closes the door. And Larry and I look at each other and we said, what are the chances of sleeping in the bed of a Japanese pilot who flew over my house and bombed the American fleet that brought us in to World War II that killed 60-some million of people? The pen is mightier than the sword. So Jim, your library, what you're doing here continues the story. And let's go to where it began for America.
You need to get the lights down. There we go.
When I speak at schools, and if they've read my book, the very first question is about my dog. Her name's Hula Girl. And I put her on the cover because of this question. Is your dog still alive? And so I can say yes, because she is a cover girl and she lives on this cover. I am 6 years old. I go to school in Honolulu. This is my school uniform. And this is my gas mask. And if I were, and when I go to schools, I ask the children, now I go to school, I carry a gas mask. On my playground are bomb shelters. I can't be out at night. I have to be in the house by 6 at night, and I can't leave till 6 the next morning. And I cannot turn the lights on. And in my wallet, I have invasion money. What country am I from? Nobody ever guesses the United States, and yet this is your history. This is, every one of you has World War II history. The war touched so many homes. So if it's not your grandparents, it's your great-grandparents. Oh, we need the sound. Where's our AV guy? And then if we could catch the, oh, maybe that, does that light bother you coming there? Thank you.
December 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost.
And war had begun. It had been going since September the 1st of '39, when Hitler had invaded Poland. And this is the center part of the book that I did for National Geographic about what was it like to be a child. So I did include some here in Kansas City to talk about the home front. Here I am in Hawaii with some other classmates, or not classmates, but friends in Hawaii. This was actually a neighbor right here who was Japanese, and the story of the Japanese who lived in Hawaii during the war is probably a whole nother book in itself. But I was able to be evacuated and taken care of. But the Japanese, and again, I didn't find out his story until I started researching my own for Pearl Harbor Child. But this is Thompson Izawa, who every Sunday morning goes down to Pearl Harbor to go fishing. And that Sunday morning, he and his dad are there fishing, and he hears like the sound of buzzing bees, and he said, we couldn't figure out what it was, and the buzzing bees came closer and closer and closer. And then he said, oh, son, the father to Thompson, we are in trouble. Those are Japanese airplanes. And they came right at him because where we lived was right by the Utah. The Utah was a target ship. Next to the Utah is where our aircraft carriers normally are tied up. Likely our aircraft carriers were not there that morning, but the ships see the airplanes see the Utah. That's where the attack begins. Thompson witnesses the very first bombs at Pearl Harbor. His dad takes him by the ear and he says, we gotta go home, son. By the time they get to their house, the Japanese neighbors have all collected because Thompson's father can speak English. We get to go hide in the sugarcane fields. We get to be taken care of by the next town. Thompson and the Japanese neighbors of mine were held at gunpoint in the rain. It rains every night in Hawaii up in the hills. And his story was much different than mine. And I've already told you, if you were German, what would happen to you in Germany. If you would have been Lily, and Lily came to be on my caseload when I was a psychotherapist, and I saw the tattoo on her arm, and I asked about it. And she says, oh, I was at Auschwitz. Eventually, I got her story. I thought she came to me because she was depressed because of what had happened to her as a teenager. No, she was depressed because her hands now had arthritis. She could no longer be a seamstress or work. And that was what was bothering her. But I got to hear her story. How did she survive? In Auschwitz, actually, yes, in Auschwitz, one of the dining room people says to her and her teenage sister, go to the kitchen tonight after dark, reach in the garbage, take out some of the beets, left from dinner, tomorrow morning at roll call, you rub them on your cheeks and on sister's cheeks, and then stand at roll call, and you will be chosen to go work somewhere else. That's how she survived. If you were Eiko, and you were 12 years old living in Tokyo, you would tell me that we bombed you. Along about April, America wants Japan to surrender. Japan won't surrender. So we are sending, not only we're sending leaflets, but we are sending the airplanes every night. And she said, we saw them coming, and they looked like twinkling firelights. These were fire bombs. Tokyo, not concrete, wood. And so this one particular night, her mom hears the planes, and they are closer to where they live in Tokyo. And the fire bombs have made a circle, and the city is on fire. And as she looks back at her house, the top floor is gone. There's a man's leg just laying there. Her mom ties Eiko, 12-year-old, to mom. Little brother, 6 years old, behind them, and she pulls them through the fire to get away. That's how they survive. Everybody else saw the fire burning, and they ran to the center. Eventually the fire burned in, and 80,000 died that night. Eiko said, you know, maybe it wasn't so good to survive because we went out into the country and all we had were sweet potato vines to live on. I'm the littlest girl here, and I've just lost my baby brother. He died of cancer just a few months ago. This is our Hawaiian mother, and our father from Independence, Missouri, and we have come to live in this house on the Pearl City Peninsula so that my mom can go to her job for Pan American World Airways. So when the United States is looking for, we need to have a large military presence in the Hawaiian Islands. They looked at all the islands, and the one selected is the island of Oahu for Pearl Harbor. Very natural harbor, it was already there. It could accommodate a large number of ships. This is a more recent aerial photo because battleships certainly aren't here. This is just a mothball fleet that is over in this area right now. I lived right there, and the Utah is there, right there, and that's the Missouri, and that's the Arizona. Here, narrow channel to get out to the ocean, and if that was guarded and you had submarine nets, we felt so safe. And this is the position of the ships that morning. Here are the oil tanks. The third wave was to come back, and they were to have gotten these oil tanks. And if that third wave had been successful, we would have been in really difficulty and huge problems because we would have had no fuel. But all of these were preserved because when the Japanese found that our aircraft carriers that were normally right here were not in Pearl Harbor that morning, they were afraid and didn't know where they were and made the decision to return to Japan as quickly as they could. So there's the Utah. If you have a military ID, you can get onto Ford Island, and I would hope that you would go over to the Utah. It's It's called the Forgotten Memorial. You can still see it. It lays on its side. It even has kind of a tree growing out of it. It was a target ship, and it did sink with 58 men on board of her, but she was not in an active duty ship at that time. And here's the area that Pan American was based, and Mom could walk to work. So here's Mom and Dad. If you were a tourist, you came on these clippers, flying into the islands, landing on the water with these pontoons. Loved to go down and look at these airplanes. And this is when my love of airplanes began. As a small girl, I was down there a lot, walking on these boat docks and going in to these sea clippers and looking at the bunks that came down that the passengers would sleep on. And it isn't, you know, we complain today, you could leave Kansas City about 7 in the morning and be in Hawaii before sunset, and we complain about that long 7 or 8 hour flight from either Dallas or Denver or Chicago, whichever way you're going. But the first planes were 24 hours from California, and then down to about 13 hours before the jets arrived. So here we are in Hawaii with that mindset that no way could we be attacked. We are so isolated. And look how isolated Hawaii is. This is one reason that we were not discovered. We're the last discovery in our Earth. And we are the back door for California. We are the Gibraltar of the Pacific. There is a huge, huge military presence in the islands. And so growing up in Pearl Harbor, that was always around me to feel that. And it's still, certainly still there today. We had our eye on Japan. You know that she'd already been into Manchuria, Korea. She certainly had her eyes in Indonesia, wanting all those natural resources. And our aircraft carriers were gone. We had 2 of them. Japan had 6. And ours were gone because we thought, no way could we be attacked by Japan, but we better go help the Philippines. So our aircraft carriers, especially the Enterprise, was right about here at the time of the attack. Certainly close enough to go looking for her, but luckily she was not in the harbor that morning. Japan had an amazing, brilliant plan to come to the islands, and she prepared up here in the northern islands, and 300 and some pilots trained, 6 aircraft carriers carried those pilots with their airplanes on the backs of these aircraft carriers. And out at sea, the tankers went with them. They refueled at this point. This is when they decided, the coast is clear, we have not been found, and they headed due south. And here they are. 4,000 miles, that doesn't make a difference if you bring your airplanes so that they are only an hour from their target. This is taken on the deck of the Akagi, the lead aircraft carrier, and you can see this is to protect the center, the specially built torpedoes and bombs. And the airplanes are ready. They had a crew that had the airplanes warmed up, ready to go, so that when the pilots came from below deck, they just were into their airplanes and ready to take off. This is Lieutenant Zenji Abe, who had his picture taken that morning and flew off of the deck of the Ataki, and his crew waving "Banzai, Banzai, Banzai." And I got to ask Lieutenant Mr. Atagi after the war, did you hate us? Because I know your American friend Richard hated the Japanese, absolutely hating them. And he said, no, I trained at Itajima Naval Academy. I loved my country. I did what I was trained to do. That morning, the whistles blew. We got up, and they went through this ceremony of where they wash themselves. They take a long white piece of linen, and they wrap it all the way around themselves, make a loincloth. Then there's a shark skin piece that goes over that, and he prepared himself. He laid out his flying suits. He chose his favorite one, the khaki-colored one. He stepped into it, buttoned into his pocket the picture of their baby daughter. Then to pray. And then down the narrow hallways, climbing up the ladder and into his plane, flying in close formation, the overhead canopies open. Certainly couldn't use their radio back and forth. They also came the whole way from Japan, no lights and in complete radio silence to stay undetected. These are the planes my dad and I saw standing in our front yard that morning, just barely above the trees, barely above our house. The torpedoes of that time were used out in the ocean and would have been too large. That harbor is very shallow. So with wood fins, this would keep them buoyant and keep them up in the water, so it would go just below the water line. When you go to the Pacific Aviation Museum, this is where we took this picture, and you'd be able to see that. Rooster tails. The West Virginia is about to take 2 torpedoes. These are some bombs that missed. And it certainly was Battleship Row. They're almost Velcroed together. We were worried at that time in Hawaii about the huge Japanese population. Hawaii even today has a huge Japanese population. And at that time there were about 130,000, almost half of the Hawaii population were Japanese. And so we were afraid of terrorism. Does war kind of seem to never change? And so our ships were close together, our airplanes were taken out of the hangars, didn't want any bombs set on them. We can watch them easier if we push them up against the runway. And then up against the runway, if you even push them wingtip to wingtip, you can watch them better. And let's see, let's lock up the ammunition. So on the morning of December 7th, our ammunition is locked up and our airplanes are pushed up against the runway, wingtip to wingtip. This is the sinking West Virginia. Captain Benyon will be soon giving orders to abandon ship. That means over into the water, avoiding the oil that is burning underwater to over to the middle of Ford Island in the center. Richard Fisk, the bugler on the West Virginia, 8 o'clock in the morning, he's in position, and at 7:45, he is ready for the men to come up on deck because they will be raising the flag, call to colors, salute. And out of the corner of his eye, here comes this lone airplane about 20 feet off the water. Richard's first response, just like we did at 9/11, oh, pilot error, no way can anyone attack us. And so Richard is just like everybody else. I'm going to get the number off the tail of that plane. I'll have that American pilot court-martialed. How dare he come in here like that? And then out of the belly, into the water and into the side of his ship. And because he is up so high, airplane coming in so low, they look eyeball to eyeball at each other. This is when Richard begins to hate. When the nightmares begin, hates all things Japanese. So he doesn't mind. He says, I didn't mind going to Iwo Jima. And after World War II, I signed up for Korea, and then I went to Vietnam. Didn't mind. I wanted to get rid of that enemy. The Enterprise gets the radio message, Pearl Harbor under attack. Admiral Halsey starts sending his men off. We've got to find those Japanese aircraft carriers. They looked all day. The Pacific is a huge ocean. This aircraft carrier was down by the large island of Hawaii. The Japanese aircraft carriers were up by the North Island of Kauai. But he looked and he sent them off one after another after another. And now it's almost dusk. The last 6 are getting ready to come in. Request permission to land, sir. Permission denied. Request permission to land, sir. We are almost out of fuel. Denied. And I'm sure Admiral Halsey was way more flowery than denied. I cannot light up this deck. We don't know where the Japanese are. Turn around. Go back to Pearl Harbor. Are you starting to get chicken skin? Because what's happening at Pearl Harbor? It's burning. Turn around. But I will tell them you are coming. When you go to Ford Island, look at that red and white tower that still stands there. She has a new paint job. I liked her when she was fading red and white, but she's still there. Admiral Halsey says, I will radio and tell them you are coming. I'm sending my 6 best pilots back. They turn around. We shot them down. See, we don't like to tell these stories. I couldn't find this story till I was asked to speak at Pearl Harbor at the 50th, next to the surviving pilot, who was from Lee Summit, Missouri, Jim Daniels. And he said, when I finally got to land, then a Marine hit me over the head with his rifle. That's how scared we were. He said, everybody who had a gun, I'm sure, because we were waiting for airplanes to come back. We were waiting for the Japanese to invade. We were told that all during the war, they're coming back, they're coming back. And so you can just imagine it's in the dark, flames, picking men up out of the water, and you hear airplanes. It was amazing that Jim Daniels survived. How sad. Friendly fire. It always happens. You know those guns that we had locked up? Oh my gosh, this is an attack. We have to unlock the guns. We have to load them. And if we miss those 300 and some airplanes, do you know how many we got? 27. That's all. And if we miss them, look where the shells come down. She was 2 years old. Miles away, 10 miles away, Pearl Harbor. Probably even didn't know what had happened. Look what happens when shrapnel. We went to hide up in the sugarcane fields, 39 Ford. My dad slides in our car. We can't get any information. We're using the radio, car radio. All we get is military, report to your bases, medical to the hospitals. The rest of you stay in your house. We had already left because of where we were, but nobody else was to leave their house. You could not use your phone. And I keep thinking now, where was CBS Evening News or Walter Cronkite or my cell phone to tell me what's going on? But this is what we saw. I wanted to go home. I'd left my dog. This is where we went instead. A sugar plantation next to our area kept us for about a week so that it would be clean of any unexploded shells, bombs, so that we could go home. Our schools were closed right away. We didn't have school again until about February. This happened immediately. Inoculations, we were worried about germ warfare. The money is marked. Head of a bullet from out of our kitchen wall. This is what money looks like that way. My dad worked in the post office. He censored mail. Every piece of mail was open to see if you were a terrorist and you were telling about what troops you saw come in or what ship you saw come in. So with his ID and with our car, with this black enamel and this gray enamel and just a little bit of light, he was able to be out after dark. This was to show our family in Missouri that I had a new hula skirt, not knowing that this would end up as telling a piece of history. But my father's family in Independence, Missouri, knew where we lived, and it would be 6 weeks before a piece of mail could get through. You could not use the phone. That was just for emergency use only. Bob Dwyer, this is that famous pink hotel, the Royal Hawaiian. And these gas masks just felt suffocating. And we had drills at school. The sirens would ring, and that meant reach under your desk, grab your mask, take it out, hold your breath, walk into the center hallway, and put it on. These are at schools, downtown, and personal backyards. As a young school grader, this is what scared me. You know, we went to see all those John Wayne movies with the bayonets, and I knew they were our guys, but that's what was scary to me. And my school was next to the governor's home, so he did have guards. Even today, rationing is still used in the islands. You might get a kick out of this. Almost everything comes into the islands by ships and big tankers bringing in supplies. But if there's any kind of a shipping strike, we ration toilet paper, we ration rice, because of the huge Asian, not only do we now have Japanese, we have Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Filipino, Taiwanese. So we are a very Asian eating culture. And the third one is Spam. South Pacific Army meat. When the military pulled out, I bet you didn't know that. See, if you go away with anything today, you'll say, I learned what Spam really means. But when the war was over and the troops are pulling out, they're leaving behind all that camouflage netting. They're leaving these mountains of gas masks. And then they're leaving these mountains of mystery meat. Olive green rectangles. What is that? Well, you couldn't get meat during the war. We started raising rabbits. Of course, I wouldn't let my dad kill them because I started naming them, you know, Mr. Patches, Mrs. Patches, and they were those fluffy Angora ones. So we were starved for meat. We've become addicted to Spam in Hawaii. Per capita, we eat more Spam than any other of the 50 states. So that's why. So we stand in line, and look how quickly censoring is happening. Censor down here. Every piece is open, military or civilian. Sad part, we're sending the women and children away. So most of my friends did leave. Missouri sounded like outer space to me. Dad said, don't you want to go to Missouri? And I said, where is that? I don't think so. But most of my friends did leave. So this is a picture of when are the next military convoy troops, ships leaving. And you just wait for the phone call. And if you were military, you had no choice. Say goodbye to your mom and dad. And I said that in one of my school visits, and a little girl in the front row started crying, and I didn't realize that I had a school from Richard Skabauer that was attending that hour. But you said goodbye. Of course, there are a lot of goodbyes during wartime. And so you went protected. You had protection all the way around you. Again, no lights at night. You could not take photos. So I've been asking many of my classmates who I've been collecting their stories, did you even take maybe a little photo of what it was like to be in one of those ships? And then we had overhead air support, of course. And then you would be dropped off in California, and then you would leave the civilians and you would fill the ships with the Army and the Navy and the Coast Guard and bring those young boys back, and they were young. And the story of what happened to those of Japanese ancestry, war is sad. It is not glamorous. We had a small area, but for the most part, our Japanese were sent here to the mainland. We couldn't take half of our population, and our population said, hey, wait a minute, I don't speak Japanese. I've never even been to Japan. I was born here. You're not gonna put me in a camp. So these camps also hold Germans and Italians, Austrians, and the very first prisoner of war for America was held here. That morning of December 7th, we also sent out many suicide subs, and one of them washed ashore. So this was where he was put. I noticed that in all the pictures where you see the Japanese, they are always so well dressed, wanting to keep their dignity, whether it was in Hawaii or elsewhere. So that makes this an even more amazing photo. This is our palace grounds. And these men are Japanese Americans just from Hawaii. There are 2,000 of them. They so wanted to serve. And at first America, we wouldn't take them at all. We said, okay, you dig latrines, you can string barbed wire, but you will not wear the uniform of the United States Army. And they said, we want to show you our loyalty. And they did. And I don't know if your parents and your baby sister were locked up in Oregon somewhere or Utah, would you fight? They did. Mostly in Europe, they freed the concentration camps. They served to help with the translations against the Japanese. This group, the 442nd of the 100th Battalion, still holds the record for the most decorated unit in all of military history. They had something to prove. Look at the women, look at camouflage. I wasn't sure how that made that building disappear, but Rosie the who? Okay, who's this Rosie?
Dale
You get 2 desserts.
Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, 3 desserts. Very good. Yes, she was discovered by a photographer who took her picture, and we know then what happened. I'm the littlest dancer. My mother is our teacher. We entertained the troops, saved our money, recycled, collected our pots and pans, grew our own food. We had victory gardens. Didn't you love it after 9/11 people started putting flags up? You started seeing service flags. You started seeing buildings with American flags on them. And you certainly didn't want this to be a gold star. I feel like, okay, I'm going to be 5th graders. You know Roosevelt was president at the beginning of the war. Who's president now that the war is over?
Truman.
I was at Parkville Schools on Tuesday. I had to lock the door and say, you're not leaving. I gave them all kinds of hints. I said he had 3 initials. JFK. No. He's from Missouri. Still. So you did very, very well. Truman. How could, I know they're 4th and 5th graders, but it seems like they should know the name of the president from Missouri. Oh, I remember this so well. What it looked like that night. The troops are coming home. Look at baby brother. These are our Japanese Americans. Look at Grandpa.